Good morning. Welcome to the online worship service of the Universalist Unitarian Church of Waterville, Maine. My name is Sarah Michaud, and I will be your worship associate today. This is the fifth online worship service in the history of our church. We are thankful that so many members and friends of this church have stepped up to put together these online services. Reverend Nancy Campbell will be our worship leader for our Easter service today. Today's worship service will also feature music from visiting musician Annie Voorhees, as well as our own Annabeth Reinders. As you will see, we have assembled this online worship service from video clips that various friends and members of this church have recorded of themselves at home. If you would be interested in making a video of yourself, doing a call to worship, chalice lighting, reading, music, or some other part of the service, please email the worship committee at uuworshipcommittee@gmail.com. Thank you. Now on to our announcements. At 11 a.m. today, Sunday, April 12, 2020, Crystal Kessler will be hosting our church's virtual coffee hour, which will occur every Sunday at 11 a.m. Crystal will host coffee hour through a web conferencing program called Zoom. To join this coffee hour and to find information about how to join the coffee hour, go to our church's website, www.uccwaterville.com. There you will find a link to the coffee hour, and you will also find instructions for how to join. As a reminder, Karen Kusiak is willing to offer beginner training for using Zoom, either as a host or participant. Those interested will need a computer and can connect with her via phone for a practice session. In other announcements, first, the evening sandwich program has been suspended until April 22nd due to the temporary increase of alternative meal sources during the pandemic. Next, while we're together as a virtual community, keep in mind that the church has ongoing expenses, and we ask you to consider making your pledge or other donation through the church website donation button or by Gmail. Also, join your church friends for a virtual coffee house each Thursday evening from 6:30 to 8 p.m. Come to sing, play music, read a poem, do a comedy routine, or just to listen and enjoy. You can join by following instructions on our church website. See you there, and remember, it's BYOC. Bring your own coffee. And finally, the amazing UU-based cutters and stitchers and pleat-making masketeers have now created more than 300 cloth masks for use by those who need them, which these days is just about everyone. After donating many to local medical facilities, we will begin to share masks with Mary Dunn to support her work in the encampments at the border. If you need a mask for yourself, let Sue Morrill know. If you would like to sew and want details, please email Kathy McKay. We turn now to the Greeting Our Neighbors portion of our service, which is a little bit different than how we do it during our in-person worship services. Usually during this portion of our service, we exchange greetings with the people who are sitting near us in the pews. As we watch this online worship service, we can imagine that we are all sitting in virtual pews, together in mind and spirit, if not in body. The purpose of greeting our neighbors is to acknowledge the people around us who have come to worship together in our church. As we sit in our virtual pews right now, take a moment to think about the other people who you see from time to time during our worship services. Think of someone whom you might like to say hello to. You don't have to do this right this moment, but at some point today, get out your cell phone or computer and send that person a text or an email, or even give them a quick phone call. Even though we are physically separated right now, we can still acknowledge our fellow riders on this spiritual journey. Now, please prepare yourself for worship as we listen to the prelude. These are the words for our chalice lighting. For holy days on which we recall the old stories, we come together. For Passover, which reminds us of the courage and strength of those seeking freedom from oppression, we come to remember. For Easter, which reminds us that learning love is our greatest vocation, we come to remind each other. For gathering today in this sacred virtual place, we come to pray and be together. For an opportunity to be together as a community, to remember the past, to envision the future with hope, to be alive in this present moment, we come to give thanks for this holy day of holidays.
Good morning and happy Easter to you. Welcome to the Universalist Unitarian Church of Waterville, Maine. I'm Reverend Nancy Campbell, and for my call to worship this morning, I want to share with you a writing by Clinton Lee Scott. Jesus is risen from the dead. The centuries have not been able to bury him. Forsaken by his friends, sentenced to die with thieves, his mangled body buried in a borrowed tomb, he has risen to command the hearts of millions and to haunt our hate-filled world with the restlessness of undying hope. The years bring him increasingly to life. The imperial forces that tried to destroy him have long since destroyed themselves. Those who pass judgment upon him are remembered only because of him. Military might and political tyranny still stalk the earth. They too shall perish, while the majesty of the carpenter prophet bearing his cross to the hill will remain to rebuke the ways of violence forever. Our story for all ages this morning comes to us from the wisdom of Old Turtle. This book is one of my favorite books. It doesn't have many pictures in it, but it's a wonderful story, so I will read it to you now. Because once upon a long, long time ago, yet not so very long ago it seemed, when all the animals and the rocks and the water and the birds and the trees and the fish and the beings of the world, all the beings of the world could speak to each other and understand each other. Back when this happened, there began to be an argument about God. That seems to be what happens when beings talk to each other. It began softly at first, quiet as the first breeze that whispered, "He is the wind who is never still." Quiet as the stone that answered, "He is the great rock that never moves." Gentle as the mountain that rumbled, "God is a snowy peak high above the clouds." "No," said the fishes, "God is a fish that swims in the deep blue oceans." "He is a hunter," said the lion. "God is gentle," chirped the robin. "He is powerful," growled the bear. And the argument grew louder and louder and louder until, "Stop!" A new voice spoke up. It rumbled loudly like thunder, and it whispered softly like butterfly sneezes. The voice seemed to come from, it seemed to come from Old Turtle. Old Turtle never talks that much. He never has anything to say and certainly never argued about things like God. But now Old Turtle began to speak. "God is indeed deep. He is swift as the rivers and deep as the ocean. She is the light of the world. Turtle, Turtle said to the willow, always close, yet always beyond the nearest twinkling star. God is gentle and powerful above all things and within all things. God is all we dream of and all that we seek, said Old Turtle, and all that we come from and all that we find. God is. Old Turtle never had said that much before. All the beings of the world were surprised and became very quiet. But Old Turtle had one more thing to say. There will soon be a new family of beings in the world, she said, and they will be strange and wonderful. They will be reminders of all that God is. They will come in many different colors and shapes, with different faces and different ways of speaking. Their thoughts will soar to the stars, but their feet will walk on the earth. They will possess many powers. They will be strong yet tender, a message of love from God to the earth, and a prayer from the earth back to God. And the people came, and the people came, and the people came. But the people forgot. They forgot that they were a messenger of love and a prayer from the earth, and they began to argue again about who knew God and who did not, and where God was and was not, and whether God was or was not. And often the people misused their powers or hurt one another, and often killed one another, and they hurt the earth until finally even the forests began to die, and the rivers and the oceans and the plants and the animals, because the people could not remember who they were or where God was. Until one day there came a voice like the growling of thunder, but as soft as butterfly sneezes. Please stop. Please stop. The voice seemed to come from the mountain that rumbled, or the ocean that sighed, from the stone that said, sometimes I feel her breath as she blows by, and from the breeze who whispered, I still feel his presence as I dance among the rocks. And the star said, God is very close. And the island said, his love touches everything. And after a long, lonesome, and scary time, the people finally began to listen and began to hear and began to see God in one another and in the beauty of all the earth. And when that happened, Old Turtle smiled, and so did God.
Now is the time in our service where we share the joys and concerns that are in our hearts. As I share the joys and concerns which have been received this week, I will omit using specific names since our services are posted on a public website. One member of our congregation shares a joy in the quick recovery of a friend from a non-coronavirus flu this week. Another wants to share the concern for young parents of the children in her family who will not return to school until fall. They are all missing their friends. Still another member wants to extend heartfelt gratitude for whoever invented Zoom, even though they still have no real idea how the magic happens. For these joys and concerns which have been expressed, as well as those that lie still unspoken, we offer thoughtful minds, helping hands, and loving hearts.
Please join me in the spirit of prayer. Dear unexplainable source of mercy and mystery, we come to you so often with questions that have no easy answers. Thank you for your patience as we return again and again with the same questions, asked many different ways. Help us feel the right direction even when we can't see it. Teach us to be gentler with others when they don't understand us, and may we in turn be more tender with ourselves when we fall short of our own unrealistic expectations. We ask that our community health fears be tempered by the reality of the universal love that throbs around us. We pray that some measure of the kindness and mercy that finds such vivid expression in your love may live on more fully in our own lives. For all our blessings and so much more, we thank you. Amen.
Hi, everybody. Happy Easter. This is Annie Voorhees here, and I got my sparkly glasses and my red lips to wish you a beautiful day and tell you that I hope many rocks roll away from inside you today and that you find something old reborn or something new that you love. I have all my piano books out here with me today to try to find something good for you, and this is what I decided to play. You gotta give a little, take a little, and let your poor heart break a little. That's the story of, that's the glory of love. You gotta laugh a little, cry a little, before the clouds roll by a little. That's the story of, that's the glory of love. Well, as long as there's the two of us, we got the world and all its charms. And when the world is through with us, we got each other's arms. You gotta win a little, lose a little, and always have the blues a little. That's the story of, that's the glory of love. As long as there's the two of us, we got the world and all its charms. And when the world is through with us, well, we got each other's arms. You got to win a little, lose a little, and always have the blues a little. That's the story of, that's the glory of, that's the story of, that's the glory of, that is the story of, that's the glory of love. Bye, everybody. See you next time.
Reading this morning is entitled Being the Resurrection by Victoria Weinstein. The stone has got to be rolled back from the tomb again this year. Roll up your sleeves. He's not coming back, you know. He's not coming back unless it is we who rise for him, we who lay healing hands on the reviled and rejected like he did, we who rage for righteousness in his insistent voice, we who love the sinner, even knowing that the sinner is no further off than our own heartbeat. He will not come back to join us at the table to share God's extravagant feast. And so it is you and I who must feast for him, must say the grace and break the bread and pass it to the left, and dish up the boiled fish and pour the wine and pass it to the right, and treat each one so tenderly as though just this morning she or he made the personal effort to make it back from heaven or from hell to be by our side. Because if by some miracle, and why not a miracle, he did come back, wouldn't he want to see us like this? Wouldn't it be a miracle to live for just one day so that if he did come riding back into town, he could take a look around and say, this is what I meant. And we would say, it took us a long time, but we finally figured it out. Oh, let us live to make it so. We are the resurrection and the life. The words from Victoria Weinstein. And to all of you out there in virtual space, welcome to today. And Easter, we could certainly use a resurrection. This coronavirus and its consequent isolation has us all hoping for a resurrection of daily living, of hugs from family and friends, and the return to a certain security of our life. This year, we find ourselves celebrating the spring religious holidays of Passover, Ramadan, and Easter in the middle of this pandemic. The holidays celebrate freedom, resurrection, and liberation, miracles we long for every morning we wake up quarantined in our homes. Where do we find hope when the invisible enemy is in the very air we breathe? How do we handle this? You know, regardless of one's current theology, I know Unitarian Universalists to be optimists, believers in original blessing instead of original sin. We really don't get that atonement for our sins thing. We don't particularly understand all this emphasis in the Christian church on crosses and suffering and a tragic death. But there are metaphors in the Easter story that I don't want to reject this particular Sunday in this particular virtual sanctuary. An important aspect of Jesus' life that we UUs have always valued is his dedication in word and in deed to social justice. He always heeded the call from the Jewish prophet Micah, who offered a commandment from God centuries before Jesus' time. Micah was asked, with what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the high God? The prophet Micah replied, he has told you what the Lord requires of you, but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. It was Jesus' steadfast obedience to Micah's principle of social justice that eventually got him killed, just as it has so many martyrs of our time. One metaphor to use in thinking about Easter is to see it as a process of waking up. In the original story, the disciples loved Jesus, but over and over again, they showed they didn't understand his message. They thought he was an earthly king. They thought he was God, even though Jesus kept telling them, no, I'm not God. I'm pointing the way to God. When he told them he was going to die, they started arguing about who would go with him to paradise. The disciples said that they would follow Jesus anywhere, but when the realities of his arrest and crucifixion confronted them, they were nowhere to be found. You see, the true rising from the dead, the true waking up, happened to the disciples later. They expected Jesus to be saved by God and then crowned king, yet he died like the common criminals crucified beside him. When they realized that God let Jesus die just like the rest of the disciples would die, it shook their world. So, what was it with these disciples? And what can their actions teach us about our world being shook today? After the crucifixion, the disciples woke up to a very different reality. As they moved through the particular heartbreak that grief brings, strangely, slowly at first, they found themselves falling in love. They were not in love with pride or ego or self-importance as they had been before, but in love with God, that goodness they could now feel within themselves. Jesus had told them time and time again, you are the light of the world. Jesus uses the word light in 76 different verses in the Christian scriptures, and yet the disciples never got it, that he was referring to them as having the light of God already within them. After his death, the disciples finally understood Jesus' messages. God is within you. He had said, quit making me a God and look instead for God, this light of love within yourselves. When the disciples finally understood Jesus' message, they were filled with a resolute courage and love, the exact kind you need to go out and preach the radical message that God's love resides within every human being. A radical message. That was the kind of message that got Jesus killed, and the disciples were now willing to die preaching it too. There was no turning back. The disciples finally woke up to Jesus' message and set about establishing an earthly kingdom of the Spirit in remembrance of Jesus. They had changed, resurrected from what they once believed into a deeper realization of Jesus' message of God and love and justice. They would never be the same because they knew that God's love dwelled within them, not on some distant plane. The disciples suffered from the soul sickness of fear when they first heard Jesus' message. They were afraid of the profound truth of the message of God's love within them. They were also afraid of the awesome responsibility that his commitment to social justice would mean to their lives. That same soul sickness of fear often runs our own decision making today. Our reality testing is especially difficult when the certainties of this pandemic make daily living so challenging. A resurrection of sorts can happen to any of us when we experience a deep awareness that is more profound than our intellect, pride, or ego. How often do we consciously run away from any hint of change? How often do we so overwhelm ourselves with busyness that we don't notice transformative possibilities even when they come to sit right on our lap? Just like the disciples, there are times when we come face to face with a choice to bless or curse the world, and we are afraid. Like those moments when we finally get it, it can be terrifying to realize that it's now up to us individually to choose resurrection or not. And in this time of cultural instability brought on by legitimate health fears, our choosing life ironically means choosing social distancing. But we can remain spiritually united while physically distant. Our UU history tells us that the Universalists were reluctant to let the hope of heaven go. For them, the final reign of righteousness, a heaven, was in our future, and a heaven not just for a few, but for everyone. They believed that regardless of how life broke some individuals, God still lived at their core. That love may never manifest in this earthly plane, but God's love always lasts longer than a lifetime. Ernest Hemingway said, "We are all broken people, but some of us grow strong in our broken places." I believe that's true, and I have to ask on this Easter morning, do you often struggle to acknowledge and accept the light of love within you? Even if you don't believe in the God that Jesus was referring to, we all have experienced the resistance to transformation that the disciples experienced after Jesus' death. We've all known that fear of not knowing what's around the corner, of not wanting to give up what's known and comfortable, even if it's self-destructive. We know about that. And this coronavirus has us dizzy with real and imagined life consequences. Where do we find the courage to trust in an unseen love that is on our side in the middle of all this fear? Where is that voice from the Hebrew prophet Micah that calls to us to do as Jesus, to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? Often overpowered by the loud noise of fear, the ever-present voice of love is there, whispering tenderly to the truth of your most precious self. Jesus' sacrifice that week in Jerusalem was the ultimate, and his human response to his final hours is instructive. Where does mercy and courage answer death? It comes first when Jesus says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." He beseeches God for mercy, not for his fate, but for the fate of others, which is the very essence of his gospel, to love your neighbor as yourself. Whenever we feel we are all alone, that even God is not with us, when our heart is empty or filled with anxiety, we can remember the terror that Jesus must have felt, his own sense of abandonment by God. We can reach out as he did, not only for help, but to help. In that trembling time, Jesus recalled his own saving truth: to love your neighbor, to love your enemy, that love casts out fear, and that God is the love breathing within you. At the end of Jesus' very bad week, we have Easter, the holiday that celebrates love over death and all the remarkable, imperfect, and flawed types of love that the human condition is capable of. Jesus' followers remembered the profound love that he expressed, and his sacrifice inspired the message of God's love that has stretched down the centuries to us today. In order for that message to spread, the disciples had to move beyond grief and despair to acceptance and courage. Otherwise, the message would have remained captive to fear and would have died with Jesus. But something significant arose from his death and is alive today, even in this Unitarian Universalist virtual sanctuary. I'm certain that Jesus suffered and felt forsaken in the anguish of his dying hours. I'm equally certain that his followers were devastated when he died. They expected him to live and save them. But he died and saved them, which is all the more powerful, however you choose to interpret it. Jesus suffered, wept, forgave, and died. His followers failed, scattered, wept and found forgiveness and lived, reborn of his death, the handiwork of undying love. For him and for them, even after his death, Jesus lived on. In his disciples' heart, he reigned as never before. Everything that mattered to him was theirs now. The way he cast out fear with faith, his love of God and neighbor, his astonishing humility, his disdain for pretense and injustice. Jesus' courage and passion were more present after his death than before, because Jesus now lived within the disciples, not simply among them. That is the essence of the resurrection. Jesus was reborn in the hearts of his followers, and that essence of Jesus' gospel lives to this day. We are all children of a loving, merciful God that offers a powerful love that can cast out our fears even during this pandemic. You can use whatever word you want to use to describe that divine. In the end, it's that universal love that remains, and the love we give away always asks us to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Amen. Our benediction this Easter morning is a poem entitled Pandemic, written by the Reverend Lynn Unger only weeks ago. Pandemic. What if you thought of it as the Jews consider the Sabbath, the most sacred of times? Cease from travel. Cease from buying and selling. Give it up, just for now. And just on trying to make the world a little different than it is, try giving up on that. Sing, pray, touch only those to whom you commit your life. Center down. And when your body has become still, reach out with your heart. Know that you are connected in ways that are terrifying and beautiful. You could hardly deny it now. Know that our lives are in one another's hands. You can surely see that that has come clear. Do not reach out with your hands, reach out with your heart. Reach out with your words. Reach out all the tentacles of compassion that move invisibly where we cannot touch. Promise the world your love, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, for as long as we all shall live. Happy Easter, and please stay safe out there.
The words to extinguish the chalice are from Amy Zucker Morgenstern. We are one. Never has it been more true than now. We extinguish this flame, but the sparks within us remain alight. From each of us, in our supposed solitude, the signals buzz and hum, sparkling through space, one to another, connecting us invisibly, but palpably. We are one, and from every window, our light shines.